James, what's going on? How you doing?
I'm doing well, Bucky. I appreciate you having me. How are you?
I'm good, man. You right there, official. I see all the logos, all the signage right behind you. Give me a lay of the land. What's the vibe like in Cincinnati right now as they head into week two?
Well, they're certainly happy to be 1-0. It's uncharted waters for the Bengals. They haven't been 1-0 since 2021, and so it might not have been pretty in that second half, specifically on offense, but to get out of Cleveland 1-0, I think they'll take it any day of the week, and they know that they're going to have to play better if they're going to beat the Jags and get to 2-0 for the first time in the Zach Taylor era.
And thinking about that, Zach Taylor made some changes because he comes from the Rams family. The Rams coaches that have worked under Sean McVay, they typically, I don't want to say chill in the preseason, but they don't play their guys in the preseason games. They try and get a lot of work in with joint practices, and they prioritize health over everything. But because the Bengals have gotten off to slow starts in the last few years, Joe Burrow and others campaign to play more. Did you feel like it had any impact on the way the team performed in week one?
I think in that first half it did. And maybe it was the difference of them getting out of there with a win and not. Because in the first half they were good on offense. They were buttoned up, they moved the ball right down the field, took the lead early, which I think is really important against a team like Cleveland because you know that their defense is going to find answers and find ways to slow you down. And so yeah, Joe Burrow was 11 of 14 in the first half for 88 yards, a touchdown, and they scored 2 touchdowns on their first 3 drives. And so, yeah, I do think that the preseason helped because I'm not sure that's the case had they not played at all in the preseason. Obviously, it didn't help in the second half, you could argue, but it certainly helped them get off to the start they did, which obviously carried them to a victory.
Yeah, it did carry them to a victory. And one of the things that I noticed throughout the preseason, Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, they were all in rhythm. They were in sync. They made a very look, it was very obvious it was a concerted effort to make sure that they were working on having that rhythm and that chemistry and all that connectivity going into week one. Well, now we're beyond week one, and they were certainly disappointed in an offense that has the potential to be one of the most explosive in the league. They couldn't necessarily find their way. What are some of the things that they have to work on in terms of the corrections to make sure they put forth a better performance in week two?
Well, I think part of it was just timing. They were just a quarter of a tick off. I don't even want to say a half second off. But if you look at some of those plays on the sideline where Jamar gets 1 foot down and normally he gets two, but the corner's there to force him out. T the same thing on the other side. Greg Newsome making a play on the outside. We're used to them making those plays and they look routine most of the time, but they were just a tad off. And so I think that's something you need to fix. It's something that Joe said on Wednesday. We still have to prove it. We've done it, but we have to prove it again this year. And so I do think it's almost the best of both worlds because if you can win in
Mhm.
September, it's great, but it doesn't feel no one's throwing a parade because there's plenty to work on. And so on offense, the unit that everyone expected to hit the ground running, I thought Joe Burrow had the best training camp of his career by far
Mhm.
and looked great. Well, they're working a ton this week, almost like they lost ahead of Sunday's game.
Yeah, it's funny because no matter the amount of work that you put in during the summer, during preseason, those things, week one is its own game. I think the fear from the other side is, man, you have an angry Joe Burrow who certainly has something to prove coming out in week two. You have Jamar Chase and T. Higgins who didn't get their customary touches. Zach Taylor wants to get this offense going as an offensive minded head coach. For the Jags, that's a lot to worry about as this team kind of comes in with more energy. But I got to ask you, man, how did the offensive line perform? We spend so much time talking about the Bengals' perimeter players. How's that offensive line? Because it takes them to keep Joe Burrow upright. And when he's upright, he's one of the best in the game.
Well, Joe wasn't sacked in the first half, and they kept him clean, and they were keeping the Browns off balance a bit. And then in the second half, a couple of things. One, the ground game just completely came to a halt. And when the Bengals tried to pivot to pass, well, then Joe Burrow got sacked. And a lot of people are going to remember the 3 straight sacks in the fourth quarter in a possession where if you go score, you go get points, you might put that game away. Instead, it was the other way. They put their defense in a tough spot with 3 straight sacks, which is just something you rarely see in the NFL, but it happened. And so a mixed bag for the offensive line. I think overall, pass protection wise, it's pretty solid considering who was on the other side with Miles Garrett, Mason Graham and company. At the same time, they're going to have to be able to block better in the run game. And I thought Chase Brown made the most out of what he had. but a lot of times he didn't have a lot. And so if they're going to be a bit more balanced and be able to take some pressure off of Joe literally, I think that they're going to have to pass block better, of course, but run block better on Sunday.
It's funny that you brought up Chase Brown in the running game because it's often overlooked. And when the Bengals have been at their best, I mean, you go back and you think about Joe Mixon and what he added to the mix. So now they hand the ball to the young guy. Chase Brown didn't have a lot of success this past week, but what does he bring? How can they ignite their running game going into the game with Jaguars?
But yeah, what's wild is he had 43 yards rushing at halftime, and he finished with 43 yards rushing, and he had 9 carries
So
in the
crazy.
second half. And so, yeah, it's wild stats wise when you look at it that way. But he's explosive. I mean, that's what I would say. Chase Brown is an explosive back. He's gotten so much better. Played at Illinois, so he's used to running between the tackles. He had 328 rushes, I think, as in his final year with the Illini. But he's gotten so much better as a receiver, and in this offense. That's huge. He's worked out with Andre Yosavash and Charlie Jones and all these other receivers in recent years in the offseason. And so I think his value as a pass catcher is just as important as his value as a runner. But I think he may lead them in touches every single week, and some weeks lead them in receptions as well. He's a big part of this offense and someone that they would love to get in open space because he's explosive.
He is explosive. He is dynamic. He's terrific. He and his twin brother, see, like really, 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 really good players. Now, I'm be honest with you. Like, I did not finish week one thinking that I was going to have to talk about the Bengals offense because it was an expectation that they were going to be great and the struggles would be on the defense. But then you look at week one, the Bengals defense plays really well. Trey Hendrickson, Shamar Stewart, those guys show up. What did you see from the Bengals when you had a chance to watch them in week one on defense?
Yeah, I think they, especially in the second half, showed up. They were able to get some pressure. They didn't pressure Joe Flacco in the first half either. No sacks. In the second half, they were able to get some heat on him, force a couple of turnovers. Trey Hendrickson was Trey Hendrickson. All the doubt that
Hmm.
might have been there because of the contract stuff, he goes out there and he's just getting pressure after pressure. And that's what you expect from 91. That's why they wanted to keep him and got a deal done with him. I think there's a few bright spots. One, Shamar Stewart looked disruptive. He looked
Hmm.
a lot like he did in college, where he might not be getting the sacks and tackles, but he's going to matter. And they need that of someone else besides Trey Hendrickson that's going to matter. The thing that impressed me the most about this defense was what they did on the ground. They were able to shut down the Browns' rushing attack, held them to 2 yards per carry. And when you make a team like the Browns one dimensional, well, they're bound to make a mistake or two, and they did in the second half, obviously. So yeah, I think that's a huge, huge key going into Sunday is making sure that Travis Etienne doesn't have any 70+ yard runs.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, that's that's the thing. The Jaguars successfully ran the ball against the Carolina Panthers, but then I'm looking at the Cincinnati Bengals defense. Al Golden has a bunch of young guys playing really well. You talk about Trey Hendrickson and what we know he's going to bring, but Shamar Stewart being able to come after the long, extended holdout, sit in,
Mhm.
sit out, or whatever that is. Were you surprised by his performance right out the gate?
I wasn't. I think a lot of people were. He's been so disruptive throughout training camp and kind of early on when he signed his deal, he was playing with the second team. And he was so disruptive to Jake Browning and batting Jake Browning's passes, and you can just kind of see him around. And then he got in with the first team and did the same thing. And I think he's a very unique player where he has the size, speed, strength. Even if he doesn't have all the technique and all of those things down yet, he can still succeed. He can still matter. And so yeah, I'm excited to see him this week and see if he can build on what he did in week one.
It's funny you talk about seeing what he can do to build on week one. I got to tell you, man, Al Golden was very, very impressive in terms of coordinating the defense. I was of the belief that Golden, coming from college, would work well with a younger defense because you spend so much money on offense. You're gonna have to be drafted and develop on defense. Have you been impressed with the new coordinator for the Bengals? I mean, he stepped into some big shoes to fill with Lou Anarumo, but it looks like he's succeeding so far.
Yeah, so far so good. I mean, I'm not going to pretend that there weren't times Sunday where you're like, well, is this just going to be running it back when the Browns are going downfield in that first half, especially, or maybe their first drive of the second half? But no, they adjusted well. And I think that it's going to take time to match exactly what Al Golden's doing from an overall vision standpoint. But I think they're young. I think they're fast. I think they're hungry. And I didn't see that last year. And the other thing I didn't see last year was being on the same page. If you give up a play, everyone gives up plays. But you don't want to be looking like,
Mhm.
no, that was your fault or my fault or whose fault was it? And that happened too much last year. I haven't seen that yet, even when they gave up plays throughout training camp. So we'll see if they can keep it going without Gold.
Now, Al Golden certainly will look at the Jaguars offense, and it starts with Trevor Lawrence.
Yes.
Trevor Lawrence's odds on FanDuel Sportsbook over under is 238 and a half passing yards. I'm going to take the under on that. But I
Oh,
want to ask you I'm going to take the under. They're not going to throw it that much. They're going to try and run the football. I'm going to take the under. When you think about the Jaguars and their offense, and you have Brian Thomas Jr., you have Travis Hunter,
yeah.
De'Ami Brown, what has kind of been the buzz and the conversation on that side about what the Jaguars present as an aerial attack?
I've been telling people all week, like, doubt Trevor and doubt that offense, or not that anyone's doubting it, but it's a big leap going from Joe Flacco and Jerry Judy in the Browns offense, Cedric Tillman, who had a good game, to this Jaguars
Mhm.
offense. And so it's a really nice test, I would say, for Al Golden and for this defense, because you're right, they're gonna have to stop the run and stop Travis Etienne. But even if they do that, it doesn't mean that Brian Thomas Jr. isn't going to be wide open downfield. And Trevor Lawrence obviously has the arm to get it there. Brenton Strange is someone that I think is really interesting as well and kind of emerging for the Jags. So yeah, I think this is a really nice early season test where you have some knowns like Travis Etienne and Trevor Lawrence and Brian Thomas Jr. and some question marks like a guy like Travis Hunter who could be a game breaker at any point. And so I'm excited to see how that matchup is from this secondary and those skill guys.
Okay, so since you brought up Travis Hunter, I'm gonna have a little
Yeah.
little breaking news. Not really breaking news. We'll just talk about it. Word on the street is that Travis Hunter is going to play a little more offense and defense. Last week, he spent most of his time on offense, but this week, evidently, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins required you to bring the A team. So Travis Hunter is going to play more on defense. There's going to be a lot of fascination in terms of how he matches up. Does he match up? Does he play right or left or whatever? But how do you feel about the whole two-way thing? Because there's been a lot of conversation about Travis Hunter playing offense and defense from a league-wide perspective. How do you view it?
I I love it because I think he's capable of doing it. Now, not every play, but I would treat him as a weapon. And I think you could play him a ton of snaps at receiver and still get him 15 snaps at DB and use him on certain passing downs where maybe he'll be able to utilize those ball skills and undercut a route and make a Travis Hunter like play. And that's what I think is really interesting this week is all the deception and everything the Jags are going to try to do on
Mhm.
defense to get after Joe Burrow and trick him into making a mistake. How much is Travis Hunter a part of that? Because that's a big unknown for Joe in this offense going into Sunday.
Okay, so there we go. We got a bunch of unknowns. I don't really know what the Jags can do besides Travis Hunter playing a little more defense to help them out, as well as being a contributor on offense. You're talking about this offense for the Bengals needing to get jump started. We've talked about Al Golden and the impact on the defense. So now it comes down to the coach. How confident are you in Zach Taylor in terms of fixing whatever problems happened in week one so this team can perform much better in week two?
It's funny because I've been the one that's highlighted all week long. Zach Taylor's 0-6 in week two in his career. He's never
Oh,
won a week two game. I asked him about that on Wednesday. And he was like, "Look, I'm just focused on getting to 2-0 for the first time in my career." And that makes sense, right? That's what he should be focused on. But if you look at the past couple of years, they have been better in week 2 versus week 1. Last year, week 1, they played New England. They should have beat the Patriots. They didn't. They laid an egg. Then they go to Kansas City and they lose 26-25 in a game that went down to the final play. And so he's gotten them to respond from week 1 to week 2, and I would expect him to do it again. I think this offense is going to be better this week. They were awful, just awful
mhm.
in the second half. So I would expect him to be better. I expect the Bengals to be better. The question is that enough to beat this Jags team?
Well, I mean, the Bengals are favored by 3.5, and so I'm gonna put it on you right now. What do you think? When we finish at 4:30 on Sunday, Bengals, Jags, what do you think the outcome is gonna be?
3.5. That half is always that's a key piece of this now because I think like 30 to
Uh-huh.
27 sounds right, and I think a field goal game sounds right. The thing is people don't know about Cam Little yet. I don't think NFL wide. I do though. He's got a leg, and so does Evan McPherson as well. So I think it comes down to the kickers, 30-27. I'll lean Bengals because I do think Joe and Jamar are just going to play much better, but I could see it going either way.
No, I mean, look, man, I think it's gonna be a very tight contest, and we talk about that 3.5 point spread on FanDuel Sportsbook in favor of the Bengals. I think the Jags cover. I think it's gonna be a hard thing to go on the road and knock off the Cincinnati Bengals. So I'm gonna go with the Bengals. So both of us on the Bengals, but we'll see. This was great, man. I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate you joining the Bucky Brooks Show, sharing some insight on the Cincinnati Bengals. I look forward to having you on again in the future. Enjoy your weekend. Enjoy everything. Thanks so much for coming.